Hello, everyone. Welcome to the very first live chat in our series about the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships Program, also known as STPF. My name is Murab Sarwar. I'm the recruitment director for the fellowship. You all have most likely heard from me plenty, probably too much, but I mainly serve as a resource and cheerleader for you to successfully navigate the application process and understand all things STPF. And I also have the privilege of being your moderator for today's chat. The live chat series is an opportunity for you to ask STPF fellows your questions. And we hope that through these chats, you'll see how the fellowship can impact policy and transform your career. Okay, on to a few more housekeeping items. To put today's session in context, we're hosting one chat each month during the application season. You're more than okay to join us for one, some, or all of them. Each chat is going to focus on a unique aspect of the fellowship experience, and you'll get to hear from different fellows throughout each chat. Today's chat is really focused on answering the question of what it's like to be a fellow. And in case you haven't heard, the application is open, and it closes on November 1st. So for everyone who's here in the room, would love to kind of get some more insight into who's here, and we're going to launch a quick poll of who's planning to apply. So I'll go ahead and put that out there. If you can please put in your vote, exercise your civic duty, and would love to kind of see who we're working with today. All right. Cool. I think there's a good mix of folks who are planning to apply in this cycle. In the future, wow, really good balance of just all types. So really thank you for being here. Really appreciate the opportunity of getting a chance to talk to all of you in the different groups. So for those applying or thinking about applying this year, glad you made it to this chat. This session is going to help you really understand the day-to-day life as a fellow. It's one of the questions that we get often, as well as contributions made by fellows. And for those of you who may be a few years away from applying, it's great that you're here too, right? There's a lot of ways to learn about and engage in science policy. This might be your first way of connecting your scientific expertise to policy work. And so again, super thankful that you've made the time as well. And then for that last group, thank you for sharing your time with us to learn more about our program. We really do appreciate you. And so since so many of you are in different buckets, we'd love to share a brief overview of STPF and the program in general. These fellowships are an opportunity for doctoral level scientists and engineers to spend a year contributing their expert to federal policy. For 2023 applicants, positions are available in all three branches of federal government: executive, legislative, and judicial. You can apply to two of these three areas, right? So you can apply to legislative and executive or judicial. Fellowships are a paid one-year full-time commitment in Washington, D.C. For a sense of timing, someone who applies in 2023 will be considered for a position in the fellowship class that runs from September of 2024 all the way up until August of 2025. So it is a long cycle, but we're in the beginning of it right now. I do also want to briefly touch on eligibility. Applicants must be U.S. citizens, hold a doctoral degree in the sciences, social sciences, or engineering, and they cannot be a full-time federal or AAAS employee. Those of you with a master's in engineering plus 3 years of professional engineering experience are also eligible to apply. You all here are representing many different backgrounds, from biological and physical sciences to social sciences, computer sciences, and engineering. The diversity of discipline is super important to us. And it's also really important to the federal agencies and offices that host fellows and are looking for a wide range of backgrounds and skills. So definitely not one thing preferred over another discipline. We really do look for a big balance to be able to, help, satiate different needs. Okay, so now on to the purpose of today's session. Ask questions. So please ask questions. These chats are meant for the audience and for you to come in asking anything and everything that you can think of. To do that, please click the question box in the menu and type your question in. And if you like, you can indicate to the person or people to whom your question is directed to. We'll get to as many questions as we can today. Now, I'm happy to introduce you to our two fellows joining us today. Dr. Avelino Amado is a graduate of the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where he earned his PhD in kinesiology in 2019. Post-graduation, Dr. Amado went on to run the initiative to maximize student development program at Weill Cornell Graduate School, a $2.4 million National Institute of Health Award from the National Institute of General Medical Sciences. A member of the 21-22 STPF class, he has been working in the Basic Research Office of the Department of Defense. As a fellow, his portfolio has included a variety of policy issues, including research security and open access, international engagements, and using his coding abilities to support data-driven policymaking. Upon finishing the program, Avelino looks to continue working in the government, supporting the advancement of technology and innovation. Dr. Rajiv Thakur is currently a AAAS S&T Policy Fellow in the Input Systems Division of Center for Agriculture-Led Growth at RFS at USAID. Rajiv is on sabbatical from Missouri State University, where he is also the Associate Professor of Geography. He is an economic geographer who has published and presented within the context of applied economic development and has emerging interests that reside at the intersections of economics and the environment. Within the Input Systems Division, he is a member of the Innovations team and contributes to the process of data collection and network mapping to understand and facilitate the technology transfer. For the second year of his fellowship, Rajiv will be working with the Office of the Science and Technology Advisor to the Secretary of State at the U.S. Department of State starting in August. Okay, and if I could ask my panelists to turn on their cameras, thank you. All right, so thank you all. Thank you both of you for being here today. Before I go into questions from the audience, I'll kick it off with one. If you could just introduce yourself, your fellowship placement, and what contribution you are the most proud of from your time as a fellow. How about Rajiv? Can you start us off? I think you're on mute, Rajiv.
Am I muted?
No, you're not. Now you're good to go.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Do you want me to start?
Yes, please.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to be here, and it's a pleasure. I'm Rajiv Thakur once again, and I'm currently, there's been a change in my status. I've been promoted from associate professor to full professor effective May 18th. As a geographer, it's been almost 23 years that I have been a faculty now, both initially as a grad student and then as faculty. My professional career is pretty much divided between the United States and India. India, where I spent about 10 years working between early 1990s and up to 2002, broadly in the development sector, working on a wide variety of applied economic development projects, anywhere between the Human Development Report project at the state level in India to several poverty alleviation projects of intervention with the World Bank, with the German funding agencies and several other donor agencies. And this was all part of my role as a technical consultant for the Ministry of Education's public sector undertaking called Educational Consultants India Limited. But somewhere as I was doing all of this, I was also a freelance television and radio person. But fast forward, I wanted the idea of coming to the US for higher education, and that happened. Geography was the discipline in which I was interested because of the broad scope and opportunities that it provides. So I ended up at Indiana State University doing my PhD. In fact, my doctoral research was very much focused on science and technology policy landscape. So much of what we do here within AAAS and in the federal landscape broadly is very much something that I was familiar with. But unfortunately, I wasn't able to apply earlier because I was not a US citizen until 2016. So I had to wait. But I was aware of the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship back in 2009 when I was finishing my grad school PhD. Currently, I'm happy that my first year placement has been at USAID, its Bureau for Resilience and Food Security. And within the Bureau, I am essentially a member of the Center for Ag or Agriculture Related Development. And within the Ag Center, I'm associated with the Input Systems Division, which essentially looks at research. So many of you may have heard of an institution called Feed the Future, which is a global, which is an initiative of the U.S. government, interagency initiative to deal with and to tackle global hunger. We have several innovation labs, almost 23 innovation labs, more than 20 target countries in which we operate. Food insecurity is a major issue in the context of what we have already experienced in the last 10 months between the Ukraine war, the fertilizer crisis, and what have you, everywhere in between. So my own contribution is essentially the tangible output that I am trying to deliver before the end of the first year is to do a network mapping of the databases that gets created out of these Feed the Future innovation labs. I'll be happy to talk more about it. I'll pass it on over to Avelino at this point.
Hey everyone, thanks Rajiv. My name is Avelino Amato, as I was mentioned earlier. I am in my second year, so I'm coming down to my last couple months here in the fellowship, and I can't stress enough how amazing this experience has been. So I think my journey started off in grad school, and I was about my third year of my PhD. I went into my PhD knowing that thinking I want to be a faculty member, thinking I want to be a researcher. And somewhere in the middle of it, I realized that that was not necessarily the path for me, but I still really love science. And I was trying to figure out, like, how do I still stay involved with science while not necessarily being in the lab the whole time? And right at that time, the University of Massachusetts Amherst really hadn't fully developed its Office of Professional Development, and now it's really matured, and they do a great job supporting students. And I can't stress enough that if you have an Office of Professional Development at your institution, leverage it, use those professionals, and really allow them to help you think through some of your job application process, because they do it all the time, and they were really critical for me, even in their infancy. But before they had really started, because that didn't really happen until the later in my PhD, I didn't have any other, I guess, outlets to help search for my career. So I was awarded a leadership grant through an award that I was on. It's called the Initiative for Maximizing Student Development. I was awarded a student grant to help create programs. And the program that I decided to create was career exploration. So I got some funds. I actually led a group of my peers to a AAAS conference in Boston in 2017, which was an incredible experience. And I got to meet some people. And this is like a really important piece in the story, because I met a guy there who later on went on to be a AAAS fellow. And when I was applying for the fellowship, I contacted him via LinkedIn, and he ended up being one of my biggest supporters. He ended up, at the time in his fellowship, he had gotten caught in COVID in Asia. I think he was somewhere in Indonesia. But because he was on like a flip schedule, he would stay up and he helped review my application. He helped prepare me for my interviews. And I can't tell you, that was already the first sign that the fellowship was going to do pretty incredible things, because let me tell you about this network. This network is incredible. We talk about it a lot within the fellowship, but I think it's one thing that the organization does well is they really do a great job of establishing the culture of, you're here, we connect with each other, and we support each other. And that is something I think the organization does very well. And I will say that it started in the application process. And so when I moved to Cornell, Weill Cornell Medicine, to be a program manager, and the time came, I always knew that from when I started those research activities and figuring out what my career path was going to be, that I wanted to be a AAAS fellow. It was just a matter of when, and I didn't really have a lot of experience coming out in terms of doing outreach and things of the sort. So I really sought my career, my role at Weill Cornell as a way of building that in. And I learned a lot about academic administration, grants management, program management, and leveraged that as with my application. And then another AAAS alum was there to help guide me through my process and help me develop my my statement. And as we talk about the application, we can talk a little bit more about how important that part is. But now I'm at the DoD, and it's an incredible place to be. I love my office. I'm at the Basic Research Office. We have policy oversight for $2.6 billion of federal research dollars to go to basic research, and we support all kinds of activities. So Mehrab said earlier, the important part is we look for all kinds of backgrounds, and that's true because in my office we have social scientists, we have material scientists, we have chemical engineers, we have it all, and all of those perspectives are important. So looking forward to fielding your questions. There's no bad questions, so please send them all.
Thank you both. Really appreciate you being here and for taking a chance to talk to our interested applicants. And so for our first audience question, what recommendations do you have for someone trying to determine if they want to be working in the federal government and science policy in general versus a more applied research center path?
I'd like to go for this. I think for anybody coming from their own respective disciplines, where they're very much immersed in the specifics of their own discipline, one needs to develop the ability to think outside the box, to think beyond your discipline, if possible, think interdisciplinary, because a lot of work that one does in the federal space of policy landscape is not necessarily going to be the technical details that you are an expert or you are gaining expertise. You will quickly be talking about those specific details to a very generic audience, and it becomes important that you're able to talk about the nuanced ways in which you normally talk about your own research, your own details, to a lay audience. Looking from the outside objectively, having a lay person's perspective literally becomes a very important skill set, which is not something that we all come with, but we acquire it, and it's very much something that we can acquire, as we grow and as we move forward. Yeah.
I'll add to that and say that even now, right? So I left academia, went in to do academic administration, got a chance to hang out with students and see the lens from their perspective of entering grad school and having to think about what decisions the administration as a grad school is going to make for the student. And that was a perspective, right? And that was I carry that perspective with me now at this level, understanding how academic institutions work, understanding how grants affect academic institutions, not only from a student level, but also the academic level. And now I get to understand how the grant process even is thought of, right? Like, what are we looking for when an office says, I help policy oversight of $2.6 billion. Now my boss and some of her folks around her are saying, we need this field to go in this direction. And even right now, as I consider what does it mean to be going back or a little bit closer to my science, I want to be a little bit more on the technical side because of the federal government. As Rajiv mentioned, you can be more of a generalist and kind of have this broad breadth of knowledge on a bunch of things, and you're using your technical abilities to think to guide you, or you're doing more of a subject matter expertise, and there's spaces for that too, and that's where you get to really dive into your area. I would say that having this generalist knowledge has really allowed me to think about my own science very differently and think about where my field is very differently, and to say, if I were to go back into science, how would I drive my field differently? What is the things that my field needs to help go forward? Because personally, I think that the field that I came from, human movement, motor control, is a little stagnant compared to some others. So what can we take from other fields to help drive innovation forward in this area?
I'm really glad that both of you are kind of speaking to like that flexibility and saying like, oh, here's like an openness to different types of knowledge. I think a lot of folks who apply for the fellowship might see like one agency or this or like another agency and go like, oh, I really only want to be here, right? And I think that kind of like defeats the purpose of like, you know, really understanding like, actually, no, like the government needs you in a lot of different ways, and how you apply those skill sets is really important, right? And kind of like developing that piece. And that's actually like a perfect segue to our next question, which is what key skill sets do you use on a day-to-day basis? And if you have an opportunity to do research or science within that scope.
I'll start off on this one. So I think as scientists in the government, I think first and foremost, you have to remember that there's a lot of people in the government who've been doing this for a long time who are not PhD scientists. And you're coming in, I think, from a space where there's a lot of PhD scientists and a lot of PhDs, and there's a lot of like brain power, to a place where there's brain power, but it looks very different. So understanding how to communicate your thoughts, and I think communication, first and foremost, is what I use, and my interpersonal skills. My research skills actually do get to be used quite a bit, right? So like in my office, as we're thinking about what is the impact of the DoD's basic research, I get to go through and, you know, look at different publication platforms. So something that we use in my office quite a bit is called Dimensions AI. It's a bibliometrics platform that has a bunch of metadata on publications over the last 50 years or so. And I get to go in there and poke around and pull down data, and I get to ask questions. And my boss sometimes will know that this is an area certain areas we got to look at, but she's not really understanding the questions that we need to ask. And that's where we come in, her staff, and say, here's the questions that I think we need to be asking, and here are the answers to those questions. And that's when I get to actually go be a researcher. So it all depends, really, I think, as you're coming into the federal government, as you're thinking about this fellowship, having, I think, a sense of the things you want to get out. This is a professional development opportunity. When I came in, I knew that I wanted to leverage more of my coding abilities, because I really enjoyed doing that in grad school. I did a little bit of it in my other job, but not really. So I knew that that is something I wanted out of this role. And when I was interviewing, that's something that actually brought up quite a bit. Like, do you have opportunities in your office for this? I knew that coding, and I knew that asking those types of questions and being a bit more of a researcher on that end was important to me. So I actually centralized it in my interview process. And we can talk more about that, what the interview process looks like at the late stage. But I think that's just something I want to kind of put out there, is doing a little bit of thinking about the skills that you want to use and flipping the tables, not something that I just use, but also what I want to gain out of it. And other things are like writing. You don't write like papers, but you're writing reports, and you're writing responses to Congress, and you're writing to other technical experts, and you're writing to DoD leadership, in my case, DoD leadership. So there's having the flexibility to think about who's on the other side of your paper, having the other side, the flexibility to think about like, what is the most salient piece of information that I actually need to get across? Because at the end of the day, we're trying to push forward some agenda, right? Agenda per se, that the office is trying to champion.
True. I'll piggyback on a lot of things that Avelino has already mentioned, but I want to talk about one skill set that we all need to develop, and the idea is that of scale. As individual scientists coming from different backgrounds, whether social scientists or biological, mechanical, whatever it is, we develop an expertise in a certain narrative that we are trained and we are familiar with. But that narrative has its own limited application. And at the same time, that narrative has an application in the broader landscape of policymaking too. It's important to sort of think about and think through the scaling process of your narrative, whatever you're dealing with, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's geospatial technology, whatever it might be, and to think about what exactly could be its length and breadth. And take a step back in developing the skill set to talk about it in the simplest of language. In the policy landscape, it doesn't do good if the language and the words that you're choosing to use is not making sense to your audience. Your audience can be your immediate colleagues in your department. As Avelino rightly mentioned, not everyone is going to have a PhD degree. Some may be with a different background. But definitely it's important to sort of think outside the box and be able to communicate about the ideas that you are good at. That's one. The other is we all come with conceptual and methodological expertise. Methodological meaning, methods that we use, quantitative, qualitative, mixed methods. And within that basket, you've got a whole bunch of other things going on. A lot of these have their applications in the work that you do in the federal landscape. I at USAID, I've had to think about what are some of the methodologies that are going to be utilized in a lot of research that we do in the larger landscape of Feed the Future, the innovation labs that we work, etc. And yes, writing is an ability that we all have in our own fields, but writing and having the ability to mercilessly edit what you're writing is also a skill set that we all need to develop. Because what we write, we feel, oh, we've done a great job, and what we've produced should be valued. But immediately you'll find that somebody, not maybe with a PhD degree, will say that, well, XYZ is not required. Stop over here. And you suddenly realize that what you were willing to say in 250 words, your mentor cut it down to maybe 75 or 100. And there's a dearth of space. You've got to be good with brevity. So all of these skill sets come very handy, and particularly the skill set of taking a step back and picking up the idea of how do I communicate what I'm saying to the audience that I'm sitting with or that I'm relating with or working with. Thank you.
Lovely. So this next question that I got actually kind of I think speaks to a part of the beauty in the fellowship and looking at the two of you coming in at different stages in your career. And so would love to kind of also ask you the question of if you can tell us about your experience with the application process, and what do you think helps an applicant to stand out? Prior policy experience, a long list of publications, experiences outside of academia or government, or anything else that you can think of?
Yeah, Rajiv, do you want to take this one first, and I'll hop in?
Sure. I think Avelino and I, we are in different places, and that's going to be the case with everyone here in the audience and beyond. I would say that currently I'm at a mid-career position, which is not the majority of our fellows. The majority of our fellows are perhaps in that stage where they may have a couple of years of post-PhD experience, or sometimes even fresh. But not only that, there are other uniqueness in my background, which means I've spent 1/3 of my career in India. Partly graduate education happened in India, and of course, the other part happened in the US. So there was this transcontinental experience that definitely put me in a very different position, in a unique position. Was able to use that to my benefit, especially the fact that today I'm trying to work at the intersection. Both research and programmatic interest is growing and developing at the intersection of climate change, innovation, and international development. The fact that I have graduate degrees in political science and geography both, and a work experience that spans over a decade in international development in the Indian context. All of that has nurtured, has articulated, and made me the individual who I am today. Also, geography is a very unique discipline in the sense that it provides you the ability to think about conceptually about problems across disciplines. So we're not a typical discipline where what we do is only our foray. But what we do, for example, me as an economic geographer, and now with an interest at the intersection of environment and economics both, there's a lot that I talk about, that there's a lot that I'm interested in, whether it's food security or insecurity, whether it's climate change, innovations, the science and technology landscape itself broadly, that comes from a greater understanding, a broader understanding at many different scales, all the way from the local to the global. And that ability to sort of look at those problems is typically a characteristic feature that geographers pick up as part of the graduate school training and beyond. In my own case, my experience of having worked with international donor agencies back in India, uh, with the non-governmental organizations in India, and in the case of the U.S., having been in the university as a faculty for the last 15 years, has of course given me the length and breadth to pick up on many different kinds of experiences, some of which were not within the campus itself, but many were also outside the university campus. I have been actively associated with some policy making in the higher education landscape at the level of the state government, which is Missouri, where I've contributed for the last 4 or 5 years before coming out to the fellowship. I've also contributed to the process of understanding what exactly does it mean to be prepared in a diverse way in international education. Study abroad being one of them that I've contributed to on my own campus, and I have constantly emphasized as a geographer that if you ever get the opportunity to step out of your own comfort zone, definitely do so as a physicist, as a chemist, as a biologist, as an environmentalist, whatever the area of interest be. Uh, because not these field trips that you take can sometimes be seen or looked at as vacation, but they're actually a learning experience. I'm just coming back from France this morning, like 3 hours ago. And at the end of my conference last Friday, which was a meeting of the sorghum community, uh, I, I requested my supervisor to allow me to stay 2 more days, and I just picked up the bicycle and went to the beach. Well, the ride was 13 miles, but you picked up a lot by learning, by interacting with the landscape, by talking to people. Even though my French doesn't go beyond bonjour and merci, but what I'm trying to say here is, I think at the end of the day, keeping an interdisciplinary perspective, looking beyond your own discipline, picking up all the experiences through the opportunities that you get wherever you are. To be honest, there's no dearth of opportunities in the university system and beyond. There's plenty. There's plenty of ways to get involved with the community and beyond. And all of those skill sets of getting involved will help you understand and actually be prepared for the role that you would be as a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow.
Yeah, I think there are so many great things in there that I kind of want to pull out. One is I want to highlight that Rajiv is the result and he is the aggregate of all of his experiences, right? That is one thing that we all are. We're an aggregate of all of our experiences, and Rajiv just has been at it a little bit longer than I have. But that was one. Those aggregates of your experience actually allow you to be really flexible, and that's what I heard here. Being able to tap into different parts of who you are as a person. So like my career path is in its earlier stages. So I was using this as a launching pad for other activities, right? And so coming in as a graduate student, I am the son of immigrants, right? So I speak Portuguese, I speak Cape Verdean Creole, and I speak Spanish. Portuguese I would consider as my second language. So in graduate school, I would help students that came from Brazil and that came from around the world from Lusophone countries. I would be their guide. I'd be the person that helped them get groceries. I'd be the person that helped them get oriented into the graduate department, not because anybody asked me to, but because I know what it's like to live with people who don't necessarily speak English. And that's the role I filled as a kid growing up. But that actually led to a lot of other opportunities. I gave my first talk outside of my university community in Brazil. Because they were really receptive. And then I had to actually switch into Portuguese, which was a whole other story in and of itself, because that was kind of crazy. But then recently I just supported the Navy because I had that experience like 7 years ago. I supported the Navy at a conference where they had interactions from Latin America and Brazil, and I actually served as an interpreter. So even though I've never formally been trained or have an extensive vocabulary in Spanish per se, I have a lot of conversational Spanish level. So that helped me, be there and be in support. So that was something that kind of got pulled from way out of the periphery, but that's just a part of who I am. Another part that really helped me, and I think Rashid spoke to something about this, is using your experiences. When I came out and I was a part-time program manager as a student, right? I got to do that as a fellowship, but actually that fellowship, I ended up being the director of the same fellowship, but professionally, because I was a student in that fellowship. That is, again, the initiative for maximizing student development. That's an NIH grant that supported some of my graduate education. But because I was a student, I had experience being supported by the grant. I had experience kind of running the grant a little bit. When I actually applied for the position that was created actually essentially for me, I had actually done a lot of networking and connected my boss to my mentor at a conference that I was at, and he was the one who actually was interested in this grant, and she gave him her grant, and he used that to apply. And 2 days after I finished my PhD, he texted me and asked me if I wanted that position. So again, leveraged my communication skills. I leveraged my the little bits of pieces I did here and there, and I had done a little bit of like outreach and scientific outreach and inviting students to campus and things like that. Again, leverage that experience, put it into my job at Weill Cornell, and use that to say, I know what it's like to work in the community. I know what it's like to engage. I'm a recent graduate. I'm going to leverage that and say, I'm going to help other, graduates trying to come into school. And so that was kind of how I carved my path out there. But when I was at Cornell, what I learned was a lot about administration and, grants management, right? And so I think getting a little bit more into this application piece, when you're thinking about this fellowship, yes, working in the federal government is really cool, but you have to understand your why, right? When you're understanding your why and understanding what you want out of this experience is really helpful. So that flexibility comes in. When I wrote my application, I didn't write and say I wanted to work at the NSF, DOD, NIH, or wherever other agency. All I said was, I get it. Grants change how institutions behave, period. I now want to, I've seen it in action. I see what it does for students. I received it. Now I want to understand, how does the federal government and how do the people in the room think about it, right? How do you get that language together? And so when I was writing my application, and this goes back to another skill set you got to have, is like your storytelling. What's the story that you want to tell, and what are the experiences that you want to pull to sort of support that story? And then who are the people that make a part of that story that can be your references to sort of like kind of bolster the idea that the story is true, that this is actually who you are, and that we can provide evidence for that. Like, how do we do that? And so my trajectory into the fellowship was very much so, I'm the success story of your public funding. I now ran your public funding. I want to think about how you think about public funding. But once you're in the fellowship, there's a bunch of other things you could do, but you've got to kind of have like a through line, a consistent through line of like that's drawing your story together. At least personally speaking, that's how I feel. To make your application stand out. Like, I understand what this thing is going to help me do into my next career phase, and whether that's going to be helping shape climate policy, innovation policy, science policy in general, whatever it be, that you kind of have an understanding of what you're going to be using this opportunity for, because it is quite the opportunity.
I love so much how you're talking about kind of like bringing your whole selves into the application, right? And just really kind of just being true to who you are, and really kind of like, taking the application process like as like, hey, this is who I am. This is where, this is where I think I can bring value. And I think that's kind of like an excellent way to approach it. So with that, if you guys can also expand upon how each of you chose your placement preferences when applying. Did you ever consider other branches like the legislative fellowship, for example? And can you speak to the placement process within your host agency?
Oh yeah, I would say for me, it's a numbers game, right? Like, as much as this is about like you're going to be incredible, it's also kind of a numbers game. The legislative fellowship is the largest fellowship, and then the executive branch fellowship is the largest fellowship, and then it kind of goes down like this for the legislative, and then for the judicial it goes like this. So when you're playing the numbers game, like the numbers game, say the executive is the largest one. Placement wise, I will tell you this. There was actually, I didn't care where I ended up. There was, full disclosure, I think I had like 21 or 22 interviews during interview week. And some people have less. So if you get to that stage, like, don't freak out. Like we can, and it's all good. But I think when I was going into the fellowship, I didn't have an agency in mind. I had experiences in mind, and I was pretty, and I was not shy about asking the direct questions in the interview. What is your mentorship process like? How do you mentor? How many fellows have you mentored? Have you had fellows before? Can I play with data? Can I code in your lab? In your lab? Can I code in your office? Can I do international engagement in your office? And can I do science communication in your office? So those 3 things or 4 things really were like the standout, wherever that ended up being. So like I had an interview at a pretty high ranking like office at the NSF. It had been a great experience to get to work there, but at the end of the day, they didn't really have any of the 3 things that I was looking for. They were offering me access to working with these high-level people. They were offering me access to getting to be a part of some of that, but that's not really what I wanted out of this. I wanted to be doing these 3 or 4 things. So, eventually I had to pass up on that. So I think this goes back to know yourself, know what you're trying to get out of it, so that when you're doing and looking for your placements, you can be a little bit more strategic about how you're picking that office. Rajiv?
Yeah, interesting, Avelino. There is a common denominator between Avelino's perhaps choices or indicators. In my placement, I was given my background as a geographer and political scientist, and also coming with a experience of having worked in the development sector in India. I definitely wanted my placement agency to be informed by the idea of international engagement. I wanted it to be somewhere where there was international programming involved. And what better agency could it have been than USAID? But I want to quickly inject something that is not the scope of this question, but it is contextually important. I failed making it through AAAS Fellowship twice before I got it. And this I say with a silver lining into it, because I think, at a fairly late and mature stage in my career, when I was failing, the idea of making it through was becoming still more stronger. I would have applied for the 4th time and the 5th time if I wouldn't have gotten it through. That is the level of commitment that I had developed. And I say that with a sense of pride as I look back, because I think in the process of being rejected twice, I learned a lot. I think unlike many of you or many of my current cohort colleagues, and many perhaps previously too, who may have had the access of someone individual, I, for some reason, strategically could not discuss this, and I had to keep it quiet to myself. I was quietly preparing and doing it. I think the one person who was really of great help in this entire process of application was my wife, who was my biggest critique and my biggest supporter. But with that context, I want to say that USAID was my dream place to work. And literally, I gave up on 3 offers initially to wait and to get USAID, and I was lucky that it worked out for me. Now, simultaneously, I was also considering the National Science Foundation. For the kind of background that I have, my doctoral dissertation and the research in the science and technology indicators in the context of the United States had everything to do with NSF. I mean, I perhaps have a good sense of what National Science Foundation does in terms of basic research, in terms of the data that it generates, and of course, in terms of its programs. But unfortunately, I wasn't getting the office that I wanted so badly. So I gave up during my first year placement. During my second year placement, unfortunately in my cohort, we didn't have a second year opportunity to continue at USAID. So of course, when I was considering getting back into the pool, my 2 options were the State Department and the National Science Foundation. It could have been the EPA and Millennium Challenge Corporation also. Those were also on my radar. But I continue to focus on the State Department and the National Science Foundation. Again, this time I was more interested in something to do with food security, because that's something which I had already picked up the interest, but broadly at the intersection of climate change, innovations, and international development. Again, unfortunately, NSF, the one place that I badly wanted, didn't get it. But I see this as a writing on the wall that, what you don't get, maybe you're not supposed to get it. You're supposed to make the best out of what you get. The office that I'm walking into, that I've been asked to join, is a great place to work. And it's basically where foreign policy meets science and technology policy decision making for the whole of US. That in itself is a big calling. To even be part of that narrative, to even be part of that discussion process, and to be able to contribute will be a great opportunity. So I think one of the things that, in closing, I'd like to say that as you're thinking about your placement, don't think about it as what you might have done in the past as part of your graduate school research. Let it float and let it go beyond your own imagination. And you'll be surprised how far those imaginations can take you and what wonderful results they can generate. Learning cannot be limited by what you picked up in graduate school. Learning is a constant process. Every time you pick up an article that you're reading, every time you pick up a PDF, a magazine, what have you, you're listening to a webinar, you're going to places to listen and having interactions with people, all of them contributes to your constantly growing knowledge that is frequently getting articulated. So I think with a sense of openness, you'll find happiness also, and you'll be surprised. No one individual can contribute and can know everything. Placement agencies, as diverse as they are, or the agencies within the federal space are so diverse, and at the same time, there are things which are common to all of them also. But we're all available, to be honest, through our our LinkedIn, our emails, etc. We'll be happy to keep this conversation going forward. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a group that I'm also thinking about is for folks who are, who are currently finishing their PhDs and might be 1 to 2 years away from applying. We'd love to kind of hear you talk through what can that group start doing if they're really intent on pursuing a policy fellowship.
Anna, could you repeat the question in the beginning? I'm sorry, I missed a few words.
No, sorry. I was just saying, so lots of people listening right now are finishing their PhDs. What advice do you have for people who may be 1 to 2 years away from applying? What can they be doing now to prepare for a policy fellowship?
Abilino, do you want to go first? Or
yeah,
I can do.
I'll take that one first because I think I was strategic in that part. So I think there's a lot of folks in the fellowship that come directly out of PhD, but the folks who came directly out of PhDs have, I would say, done a lot on their campuses, and whether that be science outreach, bring a lot, engaging the community in science, engaging, for example, like I did, I engaged a low-income community near my institution, brought them to campus, tried to do multiple engagements with them, so it wasn't just one-offs. I did a little bit of speaking. Some of the opportunities that I had to be a leader on campus, I took that as well. For example, I started a student government within my department as a way of increasing communication between faculty members and students, so that we can have more communication about kinds of courses that we were taking, having a way of airing grievances. My department was incredible, but like every department, there's always things that you got kind of iron out the kinks. If you don't have those opportunities, that's fine. I think another great opportunity would be to work in your student government. I have some friends that were very involved in their graduate student organizations. And I think those opportunities are great for a number of reasons. They teach you about when you get this global view of the campus and you have this ability to see something from a higher perspective, whether that be a program or get that be your campus, you really get a different sense of what your budgets are doing and how budgets are allocated. You get to think a little bit more about strategy and what that thing is actually being used for. And I think that's a lot of what we do now, right? And even in my role as a fellow, I get to help my office think a lot about strategy and how it's moving forward internationally, because again, that's where I've been doing a lot of my focus, some of my focus, and even with HBCUs as well. So those opportunities really do help quite a bit. There's also a lot of other networks. You can get clued into what the AAAS is doing and some of the activities they did. The AAAS sent out a call, I think, one of my last years of grad school to write an op-ed to speak out against some of the cuts to the science budget. We ended up getting, myself and two other friends ended up getting an op-ed published in the Boston Globe about the reverb effects of the NIH budget getting cut and what that meant for outreach. And then there's like the Science Policy Network, which is a great opportunity for you to get engaged as a student. There's the Journal of Science Policy and Governance, JSPG, that you can take the opportunity to write about something that is not related to you, but you're interested as a policy issue. There's a bunch of different groups. So there's ways for you to get involved and ways for you to build that up so that you can say that at the end, I have a track record of doing this.
Awesome. So as Avelino was speaking, I was also kind of reflecting a little bit on this question. Applicants or those interested in this fellowship are already expert in a very narrow area. We all are. That's an area where you can stand up and speak forever. But the ability to look at your own expertise and be able to relate it with the public landscape, whether that's the K-12 segment, whether that's your roommate, who may not be somebody who's engaged in the same discipline in doing similar research, your ability to talk about this to your grandmother and to your mother and to your family members, and be able to convince why the next proposal that you're writing should be awarded. To understand or to develop the ability to think about what you do in your research, in your specializations, and how does it matter to the taxpayer? So all of these are very important. And in terms of developing, the new applicant should also look at resources that the AAAS puts up. If somebody was to spend a couple of hours on the website of AAAS, it's amazing the amount of resources that they have out there. And you can't just read about it or look at them. You also have to read between the lines. And you realize that the specialized narrative you're already good at. It's the broader generalist narrative that you have to now become smart at. And it's not difficult. I think it's pretty easy. The only time you can make it difficult is by overthinking it. But the moment you think about it, any policy making that happens, if you think about it from the lay public person's perspective, you'll find it very easy to relate to. Having said that, I think in the world of Google and the information technology and the access to which we all have and what it can do to our learning ability, I think the ability to put some key search words in a smart way can always contribute to understanding what exactly is required. 3 words that really comes out and stands out for me is to ask the question in relation to your own interest. Is that a priority of the rest of the world? Is that a priority for my own county where I live, for the state, for the region that I represent? Is that a priority for other people? If at all, what exactly is coming out of it? How is that priority getting optimized? How is that priority getting activated? The other point is, what are some of the challenges in the area that you're interested in? How do these challenges relate to people in general, okay, or to the policy landscape? And of course, what are the opportunities which are out there, both in terms of funding, in terms of innovation, in terms of policy making, and how do they all come together? Who are the people behind all this? What are the stakeholders who are working on this in this area that I'm interested in, or that I think I don't know too much about, but I'm also interested in finding out more? So when you are asking those kind of questions, I think it becomes far more easier to sort of deal with and prepare. And this may not have been perhaps, again, a part of the question that is being asked, but I'll throw it out there. Each one of you applicants are going to write a briefing note as part of your application process if you reach that stage. The briefing note is an important component. You perhaps get about 6 or 8 choices. Do not pick up a briefing note in which you're an expert because you've published in it, or because you've already researched, or because you know about it. Pick up a topic that you're not good at. And I'll speak to this within 30 seconds specifically. The committee doesn't want to know your expertise. The committee wants to find out whether you are able to dive into a topic that you're not comfortable with and be able to write 250 words about it to your boss, to your mentor, whoever has asked you to produce. That's an important thing. I think that's where I was not doing the right thing. The first 2 times when I didn't make it through, I was picking up a topic. Unfortunately, as a geographer, I was comfortable with many of those topics, but that wasn't working out. The time which really worked out for me, that topic that I picked up was artificial intelligence, and I didn't know the A and the I of artificial intelligence. And here I'm sitting before you, talking to you and telling you why and how you can become a AAAS S&T Policy Fellow.
I'm going to jump in right there because that's actually a really important point. Like, you get once you make it through the first sort of like cut, like to get to the semifinal stage, you actually have to do this policy briefing. So for example, out of the topics that we got, one topic that my group was assigned was pick an executive memo, pick an executive order, and pick an agency, apply that executive order to that agency. And you're sitting there like, wow, what do I even do with this? But to Rajiv's point, there is a bunch of areas where I could have gone. Like there's like, when the Biden administration came in, there was probably like 25 or 50 different executive orders they were signing in. So that's the context for the question. I picked healthcare. I didn't know anything about healthcare. Healthcare was on the block. So definitely picking that was an incredible experience. In 11 days, I learned more about healthcare and the nuances of the Medicaid, Medicare system. And I was at a medical school, so like I actually had met a faculty member who was an expert, and so I took the time to just talk to him. And this was at the end of my process after I written about it, and he's like, yeah, that makes sense. Or I had gone through, and resources that I had read were like think tanks and magazines, and like you don't have time in 11 days to dig into research because you can be there looking at primary sources. So and this is a lot actually to do with what we do now, is like you don't have time to dig into primary resources because you might only have 2 or 3 days, or you might only have a couple hours, depending on, like in my position, Congress might come down and ask for something, so you kind of have to answer the mail real quickly. So you have to understand, what does it actually mean to be able to go and source information from different places, have it be credible information, and then get me 3 sentences on why the secretary or the undersecretary should or should not care about this, right? And your boss will be the one signing off on it, but she'll be the one who'll be like, or he'll be the one who'll be like, hey, I need you to go take care of this fire alert. And then, so like it comes back, and that was an extremely useful skill. And then what that ends up looking like in an interview is you have 5 minutes to present your brief. So after you submit your policy note, you have a couple of days to figure out if they've actually invited you or not invited you. No, you invite it once you get submitted, right? Like if you get invited to the semifinal, then you have like a 5 minute to present your brief, no slides, just talk, because often you'll be in a hallway with someone. And this happens to me literally all the time with my boss. She's very busy, so I have to talk to her about issues that I'm currently working on, or issues that she cares about, or we're about to go into a meeting and I have to be like, hey, this is what this meeting's about, here's why you should care. And then that 2 or 3 minutes sets her up for the next meeting. And that's like a very real skill. I thought it was like hyperbole, but it's not. It's a very real thing. And so Rajiv's point of like being able to highlight the fact that you're flexible, that you can read different things, and that you can speak to it. And I took the opportunity, even in my interview, to be like, this is an area that I knew nothing about, but I actually want to learn a lot more about, and it was pretty helpful. So as you get into that phase, understanding more about the second interview process will be helpful.
Wonderful.
Thank you both so much. I think that's like a great way to close for the overall, once you're in that application process, and kind of like how to expand upon that skill set. So Sally, we've come up on the hour. So Rajiv, thank you so much for sharing your time and giving for today's live chat. Both are open to be connecting to on LinkedIn. So if you search for their names, and I'll go ahead and share some more ways that you're able to keep in touch. But again, Rajiv, Avlino, thank you so much for your time today.
Best wishes.
Best
All
of luck.
right. So those are really great questions. The application is open now all the way through November 1st. Keep visiting our website to read more about the program. We'll also send you a recording of this chat in the coming days. The next chat in our series is in July. So if we couldn't get into your questions today, please email us at fellowships@AAAS.org. You can also follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, all the internet garbage you can think of where we're at. Please follow us. And again, for Rajiv or Avlino on LinkedIn as well. So thank you all, and please enjoy the rest of your